Canada's flagship immigration selection system, Express Entry, is designed to bring skilled workers to fill labor shortages here in Canada. But in 2026, critics are asking a serious question. Are we selecting the right immigrants for Canada's economy or repeating the same structural mistake? To talk to us more about that, our very own Near Rosenberg. Thanks for being here, Near. And Phil Mooney, also an immigration consultant. Guys, I appreciate you taking the time to talk to us about this. Now, this has been around since 2015 in its current form. Are you alongside, or can you understand where the critics are coming from when they say that this might not be as applicable anymore? And why is that?
Phil, I'll let you start that off.
Okay. Well, first of all, Express Entry is an intake control system. Okay. It was brought in after the last Immigration Act came in 2002. We had something called a Federal Skilled Worker Program, which was based on points. But the process said anyone who applied who had more than 67 out of 100 points, their application had to be processed. So in the early days, this didn't seem like much of a problem, but a backlog soon began to build because this is early 2003, 2004. The demand for Canadian immigration all of a sudden went up to much more than the target numbers the government was prepared to accept. So what happens when you have a limited intake, but an unlimited a demand, backlogs started to build up. And those backlogs got to be pretty serious in the numbers of, if we're accepting of, say, 150,000 people under this program, the backlogs all of a sudden were up to 200, 300, 400,000. And although the point system was geared so that we got the people we needed, how do we know that if it's going to take 4, 5, 6 years to bring them in, that they actually were the people we needed 6 years from now? So the control actually ended up with a really serious problem. They tried a couple of different ways to control it in 2008, 2009, but the backlog just kept growing. And the law said they had to process every file. So that led to one of the worst episodes in Canadian immigration history, where people who had been waiting 5 and 6 years, who had paid their money, who were in line, who were qualified, had all of their files wiped out. Okay, the government just said, well, thanks for waiting. Here's your filing fee back. It was like saying, you know, there's a hockey game and you're up 6-0 in the last minute and the referee says low score wins. Okay, so that's when they actually borrowed this idea from New Zealand originally, and it said, okay, we don't want you to apply for immigration. We just want you to send us a profile. Now, to get in the profile, you got to prove you have good language skills, and you have to prove what your education is. Those are the 2 tickets to get in. So you send us your profile, we're going to pick you. But we promise, if we pick you, we're going to process you in 6 months. Okay? And we were really skeptical at the time. We didn't think they were going to do that. And when we saw what the profile was, it became pretty clear. The profile looked like it needed and wanted young people, all right? I wanted young people because we have too many people like me, you know, boomers, right? And we're all retiring, and yeah, I'm a very early boomer, okay, but I'm still not retired. Anyway, we have all of these people retiring. We need to. Our demographic need is we're not having kids, so therefore we got to bring in immigrants, okay? Mm-hmm. And we need skilled people, and the Department of Immigration brought in their own emphasis, if you will, to say when, and they needed to be excellent at English or French. Okay, you had to meet that standard. Whether or not that was appropriate, we had lots of arguments at the time. So they brought in the system to control it, and lo and behold, it worked. You know, they stopped the processing, ended up going down to 6 months. It seemed like a really good idea initially, but by and large, the profile of the people coming in ended up being young people under 30 who had a Canadian education, who had Canadian work experience, and who had excellent language skills. Okay. Now, it didn't matter if those language skills meant you were an expert in Egyptian hieroglyphics or you were an engineer. It just didn't matter. You got points. Okay. Those are the comprehensive rating system points. Okay. There were some variations as to what the ticket was to get in. For one whole group was if you worked in Canada for a year, that's called Canada Experience Class, you were in. The other was the Federal Skilled Worker Program, and they had a Federal Skilled Trades Worker where the pass marks might be a little different, okay? And that was going along basically normally. The pass marks were roughly around, out of, let's say 600, they were sitting around 420, 430. And they were slowly going up, but everybody said, well, that's good. We're just getting better educated people, okay, more able. However, then COVID hit. And I don't want to get into too much of this, but COVID hit. And for the Canadian immigration system, COVID was equivalent. If, you know, the system functions on three legs, if you will. The first is it's a factory. It's a factory that processes some 8 million applications a year. And that factory at the time was consisting of 4 or 5 major processing centers in Canada, 65 visa posts, and 110 visa application centers where you could just go to get a visitor visa, submit your documents, and they worked for the US and for England and all that. So that whole processing system, when COVID hit, was basically thrown up in the air and smashed to pieces. On March 20th, everybody went home. All of the people in Ottawa went home. All of the people in the embassies came back to Canada. All of the locally engaged staff went home. So for 5 or 6 months, as you remember, we all remember COVID, nothing happened. Nobody was processing that, you know, there's no big issue. Then they started to allow people in who were at least tested. You know, again, we all remember what 2020 was like, and then into 2021. Then when vaccines started to come about, again, the demand wasn't so great, but they had a real problem because nobody was coming in as a permanent resident. And the government saying, hey, if we're not getting people in, we're not replacing the old people who are dying or retiring. Then in September of 2021, the gates opened, right? We said, okay, now you can get on a plane and come to Canada, just prove you've had a test. All right, but basically everything opened up and the department was flooded, but the system was still broken. All other people were living and working from home. Half of them didn't have computers that were privacy rated. The visa posts were not staffed, and they ended up in big trouble. So the department in 2021, 2022 was just running around like crazy trying to solve problems. And if this is a manufacturing facility, it wasn't a state-of-the-art facility. We used to complain that their IT system was back in the around 1950. Okay, they probably had vacuum tubes, and they kept trying to do things which was making things worse. And we got involved with them through our association that trying to help them solve problems like this, made some recommendations. But in doing all of that, they started to think that more is better, because if you remember, again, after COVID, everybody thought the economy is in terrible shape. It recovered far faster than anyone thought. And all of a sudden, we had a shortage of everybody. Okay, so they came in with a program under the temporary resident to permanent resident program, and they said, look, we don't care what your background is, as long as you got a job in Canada that you've had for a week at McDonald's, you can file. And the pass mark went from 440 down to 70, and everybody started coming in. Okay, now they managed to fill up the supply line again, so that although we didn't have enough people coming in 2020, in 2021 we started to meet the targets. In 2022 we're meeting them again. But by then the philosophy was, we got we need way more people. And that's when the Trudeau government increased the immigration targets up to, what's supposed to be 500,000, and everything looked great. The universities, a combination of lack of funding from provincial governments, said, hey, foreign students, we can charge anything to, all right? And a whole lot of entrepreneurs came in and said, oh, let's open up a school. And it was particularly like in our area, the community colleges said, boy, we need more people. We can bring in a whole lot more students, but we don't have space. So they would farm out their curriculums to strip mall people. And it really helped, like Laurentian College and colleges in the north that were almost going out of business. It helped them. And all of a sudden, effectively the department lost control of the number of people coming in. Okay. At the same time, when they finally realized this in about 2023, they also realized that in the previous year, of the 180,000 people they admitted under express entry, 179,000 of them were 22 years old. All of them with degrees, with a year experience, because the universities and schools were feeding these people into the system, and they were feeding them in the hundreds of thousands. Now, it doesn't take much of a genius to figure out that if you're bringing in 500,000 people a year, but you're only letting 150,000 become permanent residents, which includes their kids and spouses, you're going to have a big problem. And that's where we are now. So
it's interesting that you say that, because today the numbers come out and we are at all-time highs for unemployment in this country. And it starts to add up. Then when you have this influx of people entering the job marketplace that have been, by the hundreds of thousands, that's going to be one of the net results. Nir, what are some of the negative fallout that we've seen recently that kind of shows us that this system's outdated?
Well, I'm not sure, that the system is necessarily outdated. I think that, what they're doing now is they're looking at the occupations that need to be filled, and they're selecting individuals from these occupations. There's a lot of people in the pool. Everyone wants permanent residency. All the temporary foreign workers that are here, all the students that are here, they all want permanent residency. The problem with this is that, Canada is now looking at very specific categories and occupations that they're wanting to select, because as Phil said, this is a selection system. It's not a program. So you can be in the pool and you can sit there for months, if not years. I personally have clients that have started with me back in 2015. I have clients from 2020 that are still in the pool, that every single year we renew them. And, every 12 months, it kicks you out of the pool and then you got to come back in. So we renew clients' applications or profiles all the time in order to keep them with that opportunity, just in case there's some sort of a draw that they get selected. So I'm not sure the system is here failing. I think that it's just now Canada is looking at, how do we solve the problem of the unemployment? How do we fill these particular labor shortages? One of the problems that we're seeing is that labor shortages obviously are across the country, but the express entry pool, it's for the entire country. So you might have one area in the country or certain provinces that have higher demands, but express entry doesn't really target provincial. They do federal. So if somebody is in the pool in British Columbia with points that they can get selected for, and now they get an invitation to apply, but the in-demand occupation is actually in a different province, then they could still get that invitation, but they live in British Columbia and they're not really filling the labor shortage that is actually occurring in a different province.
And is that actually, sorry, Nir, at that point, is that accounted for provincially as well? So, for example, if I'm applying to be in British Columbia, but they don't need me, that puts me back into the waiting pool?
No, it doesn't quite work that way, okay? First of all, express entry is actually a really good tool. It's just that it was never used to select specific occupations. It had a general category up until 2023, when they said, hey, we need healthcare workers. So if you can think of this pool, whoever is at the top of the pool gets selected. Well, they put in a silo saying, okay, now there's healthcare workers. We're going to pick out of that silo, okay? And then they brought in a few more silos. Well, when you start doing that, you squeeze the general pool, and the pass mark goes up to where it's now like 510, and will probably go higher, okay, because there's more people in the pool than we need. But provinces have had the ability since the start to say, look, we need left-handed carpenters in Moose Jaw. You're in Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan could then say, oh, there's a bunch of left-handed carpenters here, who want to come to Moose Jaw. Let's nominate them, and they can actually bonus them 600 points. And so they get to be permanent residents. But, again, this isn't the biathlon. You can't shoot at a target and hit it in the bullseye. This is, large categories, averages across the country. And Canada has different needs. We have shortages of all kinds of people in certain categories. Express entry is kind of a broad pool, okay, that they try to make that. And it gets a bit twisted where if you say, look, we want people, when the reason for the categories being selected is not being selected for the economic benefit of Canada, which the department can do along with the politicians, okay? You end up with something like the French language category, which is now 48% of the whole total, but that's a political decision, based on two things. I think I was talking to Near yesterday. It's based on that the current government wants to look good to the people of Quebec to say they're supporting the French language across Canada because we're a bilingual country. And the department itself says, you know, everybody in the government has a hard time finding bilingual officers to hire across the country because in Terrace, BC, they might not be able to find anybody, and we have to deliver services in both languages. So the department's great about that. So you've now got this imbalance, and that'll have to be corrected, I believe, and the political backlash is building because that's taking away from the trying to make the express entry system continue to work purely on economic indicators. And just
does the express entry system it runs in tandem with all other immigration processes, or it is the tip of the iceberg?
No, it's not. So Canada's immigration, I was just going to get good segue. I was just going to get to that point. Canada's immigration system has three main legs. Okay, one is family reunification. You know, the government of Canada, the politicians, the people of Canada are saying we want spouses to be with spouses, children to be with parents, a few grandparents to be with their children. So there's family immigration. Just as a conflict of interest, I believe grandparents should be allowed into this country without any conditions whatsoever. Okay, because I would agree. Grandkids, and I don't want kids.
I would agree.
Away from them. Yeah. So, but we don't get to vote that much. Anyways, but so family is about 30% of our total target number. Okay, refugees, humanitarian issues are about 10%. So 60% is economic. All right, and that economic program is dominated by the express entry system is most of it, but you have a few other systems. The provinces have the right to nominate in certain categories for certain occupations. Quebec has more authority over those sorts of things than other provinces, just because we're a bilingual country. You know, it's in our constitution. But you know, so the express entry system is a purely economic package. The language issue about the French language silo is not related to what that economics is, but it's politics. Okay, and you know, if you were a company operating your business, you would stick to the economic side, but the owners of this business happen to be the politicians. Okay, so True. They're the ones that are saying that. But I mean, at least we have a tool with the express entry system that can be adjusted. It's who's doing the adjusting that is the issue.
So who's doing the adjusting, and are we adjusted at the moment, do you think, to suit the needs of immigration in Canada? Or does express entry need to be adjusted? You mentioned some changes may need to be made. Near, what are your thoughts on where it stands right now and where it could go?
I mean, I think that you know, the government is trying to ultimately pick the best and the brightest and the ones that have the highest scores. Phil, do you know who's turning the dial? Because you know, well, I'm not sure personally.
Well, that's the other problem in the system. You know, the Minister of Immigration is in charge, right? Which means the party in power is in charge. But immigration's a complex issue. It's an issue dominated by law. Okay, because there's certain things you can do and others you can't. In the Department of Industry, if somebody has a good initiative, you can go do it. But in immigration, it's a legal framework around the entire immigration program. And this manufacturing facility is set up to be in line with the legal requirements. And the only people who understand how that system really works are the department people themselves who are running it and us, lawyers and consultants who work in it every single day. Everybody's interested in immigration. Everybody has a stake in immigration, but only a small number actually know how the system actually works. Okay. Unfortunately, the Ministry of Immigration or the Minister of Immigration is a junior portfolio. So every election you get a new Minister of Immigration, he brings in his own staff who don't know anything about immigration, who don't know anything about the law, particularly, maybe a little. And it takes them a year or two just to get up to speed. It took Jason Kenney a year and a half to get up to speed to know, so he could actually help the department or oversee the department like a board of directors would. Well, we've had 5 ministers of immigration in the last 4 years. You know, they come in, they get started, and then they're gone because they get promoted. There's an election, And we're in that same situation again now. I mean, last year we had a minister of immigration for 3 weeks, from just before the election. And then it took another 3 months to get the current minister of immigration, and it's taken her, a good part of a year. And from what it looks like, so the department heads, they run it, and they like that. Because just like if you and I were running a company and knew, we want to be in control of our future, well, we'd want to run it too, right? So it's really the department that runs everything. And if the minister, the politicians come up with a good idea and they go to the minister of immigration, the minister of immigration goes to the department and says, hey, we really like this. The department will figure out how to do it in a way they want to do it. Okay.
Or find a way to say it's not doable.
Oh,
We're the
give all
experts.
kinds of
That's
legal
not doable.
reasons.
Yeah.
And absolutely. And unfortunately, that's a bit of a disconnect in our, immigration has become such an important issue now. Remember, it was never one of the top 2 or 3 issues up until a few years ago, right? Now it is.
It's at the top of almost every publication. It's at the top of some section in some manner, whether it's affecting housing or the economy or unemployment. I think Canadians, by and large, realized we had a massive influx of unmanageable immigration. And when you hear the express entry phrase, you think to yourself, I think we need to take more care. I don't think we need to more. Express doesn't sound like the right word. How effective do you think this will be in reining in immigration to a place where it's manageable and useful to Canada?
Well, the big problem is it's not the express entry system that will do that. Okay, because the express entry system is a way to become a permanent resident. We now have 2 million temporary residents in Canada, not because of the express entry system. We have that because the department, those same department heads that like to run everything, and they know every day how many people are coming in for what category. And after COVID, yes, they were all busy trying to help, keep the ship afloat and all these things, but they just took their eye off the ball. When they knew that all of a sudden that there were an extra 50,000, then 100,000, then 200,000 students coming in 2022, 2023, they just took too long to tell anybody, and that's what's caused the biggest problem now, because now our problem is not how many permanent residents we have or how fast we're bringing them in. It's what are we going to do with all of those people in Canada that don't have a job, lose their status, and now 80% of them might go home, but there's 200,000 or 300,000 that are just going to stay here and work illegally. And what are they going to do about that? They know, and the politicians will never put up with something that says, well, let's go and have our version of ICE, which is CBSA. Let's go drag them out of church basements and put them on buses and fly them out. Well, Canadians will never stand for that, right? So what we're ending
So
up
essentially,
with now,
we've built a black market, a cash economy, illegal workers, and that has so many impacts on things like employment,
and tragedy
housing.
is the worst one. And so what the department's doing now is they're scrambling like crazy to try and find ways to absorb those people into Canada, the ones who aren't going to leave no matter what, to find ways to let them stay if they're contributing to Canada. They still deported 80,000 people last year, but they're going to try and because this is like a 5-year problem right now. Okay, it's all of these extra temporary residents who are here, and if they, and you can see this, they just talked about the 33,000 people they're going to get permanent residents. The department's really sly, right? They said we've dropped the number of permanent residents. Well, no, they didn't.
Okay, that was the impression that I was under as well.
No, they said we got from 385,000 down to 380,000. Oh, but there's another 158,000 or 48,000 we're going to bring in the next 2 years that are special circumstances. And the special circumstances are they're here in Canada already in temporary status. By the way, they're already counted in our population. So if they make them permanent residents, the population doesn't go up. So the public says, oh, immigration's gone down, right? But again, sleight of hand. The department knows what they're doing. They're doing this. And I expect as the attitude towards more immigrants, it starts to improve. okay, because we're not bringing in as many students, we're not bringing in as many people who can work as open work permit holders to compete with, our students going to grade 12 or 11, in summer jobs. As that all settles down, and it already is. I mean, the housing market's the best example, right? Anyway, as all that happens, we're now sitting in a situation where we're going to have to put up with this for the next 3 or 4 years, because a whole lot of those students who came in 2023 and 2024 are in school, and they're going to finish school, and then they're going to go work. And then after that, they're going to want to apply for permanent residence. Well, by 2030, we might start having room for them. So the department's going to come in with more special programs, I believe. Okay.
How does this, and maybe Nir, you could answer this for me, because we've watched you talk about this many times about the way that you help clients. But has this major influx of immigration and the change to how we're going to deal with it moving forward, allegedly, a lot of it seems to be smoke and mirrors. Does it affect the immigration consulting business in any major way? Has it changed the way that you have to operate to get people into the country?
Yeah, I would say drastically. We've had, in the last almost year now, we've had, ESDC, which is the department that handles job offer approvals for employers that want to hire foreign workers. They are refusing more and more and more LMIA applications, which are the applications that the employer requires in order to petition for a foreign worker, to apply for a work permit. We've had a lot of those refusals. We have refusals. We have ESDC officers making it much, much, much tougher on employers. So harder to bring in foreign workers to Canada today, for sure, in all different occupations, whether you're a specialty chef or you're an IT personnel. It's very, very difficult. We've had a lot of companies that are essentially closing their doors. We've had pharmacy clinics that can't bring in the pharmacist, but even more so to that, I was saying as of January 21st, I think of this year, or I'm not sure if it was Phil, was it last year or this year that they eliminated spouses to obtain a work permit? I think it was this year where they changed that. So now if you're a foreign worker in Canada, unless you're in a specific occupation or you're in a specific level of what they call the tier level of an occupation, you cannot bring in your spouse to Canada to accompany you. So now you've got a lot of foreign workers who had spouses in Canada who now had to send them home. So now those individuals may have also left Canada because, and I've seen with my clients that they said, if my spouse can't be here, if my children can't be here, why should I contribute? Why should I work here? Right. And so it becomes a problem, so we're losing individuals for that. But yes, it's making our life as immigration consultants a little bit tougher, and we're scrambling to find different ways. I think unique ways, whether it's the provincial nominee programs or where employers are changing individuals' occupations in order to keep them in Canada on higher skill levels, but that means they have to pay more money. They have to spend more on payroll. So yes, it's making our job a little tougher. And I think Phil has access to a lot of other consultants he talks to all day long. And I think that they come to us also with problems, right? They're trying to figure out how do we keep clients in Canada?
Well, those hundreds of thousands of people now who are on post-grad work permits, especially, or they're temporary foreign workers, and they can see that their time is running out and they don't know what to do. And we're getting people now coming to us saying, how can I stay in Canada? And you've seen an increase of students applying for refugee status, for example. Again, the immigration consultants, if they come to us and they don't have a story for refugees, we can't take their case. That's against our code. Lawyers, on the other hand, everybody deserves representation. And if somebody says, I want to apply as a refugee, a lawyer can take the case. But there's no hope. But because of the backlog in the refugee system, that might mean they're going to spend a long time here working, waiting for their cases to be heard. That's until Bill C-12, which has passed the Senate now and is just waiting to be implemented. That's putting in a new requirement that says if you've been in Canada for a year, since 2021, if you spend a total of 12 months in Canada, you can't claim refugee status, which is reasonable, right? Why wouldn't you have? There are some concerns about, abused spouses or LGBT communities. Well, there'd be regulations to protect them, but the largest number are people who are claiming refugee status because they're desperate. And we've got other people here and they're out of status. They don't realize, in Canada, if you are on a work permit, a visitor permit, a study permit, as long as before your permit expires, you apply to extend it, well, you get to stay in that status until they give you a decision. The decision's taken 6 months. So you can stay here another 6 months.
Right.
But when they refuse you, you are now out of status. You can then have 90 days then to restore your status. Okay. That takes 6 months to process. But you're out of status. When you're out of status in Canada, that means you can't apply for anything else. You can't work. You can't, try to become a student. The only way to cure being out of status is to leave. Okay. But students don't understand that, and other people don't understand that. And you get all kinds of stories out there, and we're now hearing as a practice thing, a lot of the people I'm talking to now are coming with problems of people that have been out of status for 3 months, 6 months, 9 months. They're good people. They just didn't understand how the system works. I know I've just told it to you, and I bet you're wondering, how can I come as a visitor for 6 months and I can basically be here legally for 2.5 years?
Yeah, that has amazed me, actually. Yeah,
and it's
but
the way
now
the
you
system
see
works. Yeah,
the application. It's the timing of everything,
yeah,
and it seems to overlap and lean against each other. So you've been notified. Okay, you're no longer in status. Make the appeal, but that takes another 6 months. So before you know it, 2 years has gone by, and during COVID, nothing was getting processed, and everything was getting put behind 6 months to a year. So you can see how that backlog.
And again, this is just visitors. It's separate from the refugee system, which is completely different. But this is visitors to Canada. If you wanted to come and visit the Rocky Mountains for 4 weeks, and you come in the country, they give you the guy says yes. Well, you don't have to leave for 6 months if you don't want to. Okay. Now most people do. They just here for a holiday. But if you then want to stay, and at the end of 5 months and 29 days later, you file an application saying, "Oh, well, I've only seen the west side of the Rockies. I want to see the right side." Whether they approve you or not, it takes them 6 months to make the decision.
So you might as well make some travel plans. Yeah, you might as well.
You're here.
Yeah.
Yep. But then when they do say, "No, we don't accept you," okay, you must leave. You can apply to restore your status, but you're now out of status. And being out of status is the death knell for most things, because even if you then leave, the next time you apply to come back, an immigration officer's first job is to say, is this person going to leave? If I let him in, is he going to leave? Well, he didn't last time. So as far as you and I are concerned, just no big deal. He didn't do any harm. As far as an immigration officer is concerned, it's capital
They're
punishment.
not getting back in. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of individuals that call our office and they say, we spoke to someone, they told us to file an app, they're workers in Canada that now can't get a new LMIA. The employer is not going to be approved, or the employer is not willing to proceed with another filing. Or they don't need them anymore. And so they come to us, and they were refused on an extension that they had filed essentially without a real LMIA. So they file an application to stay in Canada with a work permit. So it's an extension of their work permit on the basis of an LMIA that is either in process or will be in process. And because it takes, as Phil said, about 4 or 6 months to get a decision, those individuals continue to work for potentially that employer. So you've got a lot of people that are working essentially without really a work permit. Yeah.
Yes, it's legal.
And
It's
they're
legal.
it's legal until the decision is made, but it's not ethical. And they're coming to us after they've been refused. And then they say, what do we do? Because we were told that we should do this. And now it's, now they're a restoration period. And now there's no other way to keep them in Canada except to restore as a visitor, or they have to leave. But this is detrimental to their, as Phil said, to the future of their options.
Yeah, and at the same time, just so people don't think that, hey, these are all people that are a burden on society. These are all people working.
Yeah.
They're working, they're paying income tax, they're paying unemployment insurance, they're paying into the CPP. You know,
Right.
I mean, they're paying for everything, but when they go out of status, they get nothing. Okay.
We've set the system up badly in that regard for people who want to come and be citizens in this country. You know what I noticed, guys? Can I just say this? What a convoluted mess immigration is. The way that you've described it to me, the various tiers and layers and processing and appeals, and it's so convoluted. I feel sorry for anybody coming here with English as a second language, trying to navigate that. Thank goodness, you know, there's immigration consultants and lawyers out there that can manage it. And I've been through the process myself with family. There's no way we could have understood it. And right until this very moment, I didn't understand express entry. I didn't fully understand how we are weighting the systems in the silos. It seems like our immigration system is a convoluted mess.
Well, you're right, but this is just like Churchill talking about democracy. You know, democracy is the worst form of government in the world except for all the others. And Canada's system is actually the best. I mean, the worst. It's got its real problems, but it's better than virtually every other system for the numbers we process. You know, part of that is just, it's complex. You know, and we haven't talked about all of the immigration system. There's the whole refugee system, and there is, you know, humanitarian and compassionate complaints, and there are the provincial programs. I mean, all of this is really complex. And yeah, I mean, thank you for saying without us here, it would be hard. You know, I hope, Nir, you paid, you know, for this. Anyway.
You know what, Nir, I'll just take an IOU because I'll probably end up stepping in it in the future. But
well,
I will say this,
complex.
But I will say this, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry, just on the complexity thing, I do understand because yes, immigration in Canada is a popular thing, and it has been. We've done a good job of selecting immigration historically. I think we're rebounding right now from some critical errors that occurred during one government. That's my opinion, and I think the opinion of many. But it does feel to me like we're in an adjustment period here that might be better for the country in the long run.
Yeah, I would mostly agree with that. But, you know, we have to keep in mind the overarching goals. We want spouses to be together. You know, we want children to be with their parents. These are Canadian values. We need economic immigration to keep our country moving forward. The goal of economic immigration says we want Canada to continue to grow our economy at as close to full employment as possible. Okay, that's the goal of economic immigration. Now, what that says is if unemployment keeps going up because of everything else going on, well, we should be cutting down on our economic immigration. And it's flexible. We can do that every year when they put out the levels plan. It's been done in the last years where they've dropped the numbers everywhere, okay, because the economy is not doing as well as it was right after COVID. So that the system has got its checks and balances built in. But every once in a while you get this aberration that comes along, and the real problem is the students now, especially, or the foreign workers coming in especially, they're the ones that don't, you know, they did their files, like especially they do a lot of files themselves. You know, they don't have counsel. They didn't come in with the benefit of people giving them the proper advice as to how to get to become a permanent resident. They just came in. They filled in. I mean, they fill in forms online all the time, right? And they're good at it. You know, they pass language tests because they know how to take a test. They probably can't. You know, a year later, they probably don't speak French as well as they thought. You know, and now we're getting all kinds of things like that. And so we really have to be listening more. Okay, the Department of Immigration has never been accused of being great listeners. Okay, it's a problem.
On that,
yeah.
On that note, I will say thank you to you both for this, and I'll ask you to stand by for the next time that we need to figure something out in your area of expertise. Nir, as always, greatly appreciated. And of course, Phil Mooney. Guys, I will make sure that your information is included in the description for the show in case people have questions, because it is complex, multivariate, and super layered, in my opinion. but I'm a layman. Thank goodness you guys are doing this. And thank goodness you cleared up some stuff for us today. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to subscribe. Tell a friend about what we're up to here. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.